Happy Wednesday, everybody. Hope you're having a good day today so far. So, I decided to record an episode today because I didn't have to work with the ice and the roads being, probably not the best to drive on. And no one else was intending to come into work, even if you could technically drive. Which, I know we could, but why? Why even bother? So it was nice. I was excited thinking about, I'm going to get to sleep in. And here I am. I was up at 6:30. No sleeping in for me. I don't know if I just can't do it or what. So I was like, yeah, well, let's record. I don't have anything else to do other than, but I don't know. I've been watching a lot of YouTube, a lot of looking for new things to watch instead of just the same people. And it's like everything sucks. Just everything sucks. Anyway, so I wanted to do something different, and rather than look at the usual stories that I get, which would be through like Daily Wire and things like that, because admittedly, I am right leaning, and so I tend to grab the stories from those places rather than grabbing them from the left. So I decided I was going to change that today. And we're going to look at stories from like Salon. I think there's some from Salon. And other left-leaning outlets. So first, let's read our daily promise, which says, I have blotted out as a thick cloud thy transgressions, and as a cloud thy sins. Return unto me, for I have redeemed thee. Isaiah 44:22. It says, Sing the praises of your heavenly Father for the abundant riches of your redemption. While you were drowning in the mire of your own sin, he pulled you forth and cleansed you unto purity. While you were buried under the gravestone weight of your own death, he redeemed your spirit, raising you to new life and fashioning you as a creature anew. Praise him for such unhesitating loving kindness, for he alone is worthy of such esteem. Okay. I want to look at this here. This article comes from Media Matters, and I've never looked at anything from Media Matters. I only know about them mostly from Steven Crowder because they watch his show to see what he's going to be saying, and then they talk about it. So I've never read any of their articles, and there's probably a good reason why. But this one is, right-wing media erroneously use FBI crime report to blame murder spike on police reforms. So I'm just curious about what they have to say about that. So this is written by Sydney Hargis. Sydney with the C. Okay. Following the release of the FBI's 2020 crime report, right-wing media immediately tried to blame last year's sharp increase in homicides on quote-unquote left-wing policies on policing, even though no direct evidence supports that claim. Well, and I also don't think it's just the policies on policing. I think it's the new policies on no cash bail and, letting criminals out earlier than they probably should be let out back onto the streets, or not prosecuting certain crimes. It's not just the policing policies, it's all of it. On September 27th, the FBI released its annual Uniform Crime Report, which showed that the rate of nonviolent property crimes, including burglary and larceny, dropped by 8%, while the violent crime rate actually increased by 5%. Aggravated assaults increased slightly, but the number of homicides in the country jumped by a staggering 30% from 2019 to 2020, and over 3/4 of those were committed with a firearm. Though the actual murder rate is still lower than what it was in the 1990s, this is the largest single-year increase in homicides since the FBI began keeping national records in the 1960s. While the country undoubtedly saw a spike in homicides last year, it is also important to remember that the FBI's Uniform Crime Report is not a complete data set. Police departments are not required to report their data, and those that do can choose not to report all 12 months of the year. According to Report in Time, about 54 police agencies representing populations of over 100,000 people didn't report all 12 months of data for 2020. After the report's release, however, right-wing media predictably pounced There we go. I remember that word all the time. Republicans pounce, like in 2018. Pounced on the findings and tried to blame the murder increase entirely on left-wing policies on policing and massive campaigns against the enforcement of the rule of law. While there was a spike in violent crimes in June 2020, around the same time as nationwide protests following the police murder of George Floyd, multiple experts have suggested that last year was an aberration, saying the continuously rising homicide rate can probably be attributed to several factors, including the pandemic. At the time of the protest, right-wing media zeroed in on a few violent events and ignored the largely peaceful social justice movement in an apparent attempt to shift focus away from the need for police reforms. You know, I paid really close attention to the riots of 2020, and that would be totally flipped around. We focused in on the largely violent events, which had some peaceful parts to it here and there. Obviously, not everyone was violent, but it was largely violent. I mean, let's be honest. I don't like them trying to be dishonest about what the BLM movement really was. And it was an excuse for people to go out and be violent and, you know, just do whatever they want. And none of them, there was a woman who was a part of it. Andy No posted it on his Twitter that she was being charged with different things. And, you know, she assaulted a federal police officer and she did several other things. She was part of a very violent thing that was happening. And she's spending no time in jail, and she was only fined like $340 something in like what restitution, I guess. So I mean, she literally got away with everything that she did, and here we have people that were just merely being close to the Capitol on January 6th, sitting in prison, not getting proper representation, not getting to go into the court. I mean, they're just sitting there. Nothing is happening with these people. And they wonder why we focus on this stuff. They wonder why, you know, we don't like the way that the left is doing things because they're imbalanced, they're unfair. And they try to say, well, you know, social justice, racial justice. It has nothing to do with that. Absolutely not. The reality is that homicides increased from February onward, while before any protest or nationwide talk of police reform spurred by the murder of George Floyd by Minneapolis police in late May. The numbers then rose to a peak in July, but there was a drop in August and September before they climb again in October. Furthermore, some of the cities that implemented the biggest cuts to their police department budgets did so after the homicide rate had already peaked in July. The Washington Post noted that the protest caused the violence narrative appears far too simple, in part because of a well-established trend. Violence typically climbs during summer, and in 2020, that happened to correspond not only with the protests, but also with an end to the most intensive lockdowns in many cities, making it hard to pin blame on any one cause without more examination. Yeah, I would think, okay, so we know that homicides spike in the summer. Why? Because it's warm, I guess, and no one wants to go out in the cold and kill people or rob people. I don't know what the reasoning is for that. Kids are out of school, whatever. So we know it goes up in the summer, and, you know, the BLM riots happened to take place in the summer of 2020. Then we had the lockdown that people had been locked down, but as long as you were part of BLM and Antifa, you were absolutely allowed to gather in masses, and it was fine. I understand that people being locked down may have attributed to some rise in violence. And maybe this was happening before the police reforms were being announced. But how do we know what all was going on behind the scenes with police reform and, you know, criminal justice reform before we started actually paying attention to it? Because they didn't just start talking about defunding police after the riots of 2020. This is most likely something that they were discussing in these Democrat-run states for much longer than just a couple months and all of a sudden realize they needed to do something. That usually is not how it happens. They are talking about it and planning for it, and then when something happens that they can use as a catalyst to push it out into the public, then they do that. Okay. Criminologist Richard Rosenfeld told The Guardian that the uptick in violence was widespread, but early data suggests a lot of the additional homicides are concentrated in neighborhoods across the country that have historically struggled with gun violence, like Chicago. As The Guardian stated, no single narrative can ever explain the dynamics of violence in a single city, much less across an entire country. Additionally, this homicide spike was not limited to urban areas or left-leaning states. According to crime data analyst Jeff Asher, murder increased by 35% in cities with populations over 250,000 that reported full data, and by 40% in cities with a population between 100,000 and 250,000. The increase was slightly smaller, 25%, in cities with populations under 25,000. Additionally, in March of 2020, the murder rate was up by 20% in every region of the country. This was around the same time that the World Health Organization declared COVID to be a global pandemic and lockdowns began in many states around the country. But all this context did not stop right-wing media from immediately jumping on the latest report and pivoting to blame attempts at police reform for rising crime. So during the September 28th edition of Fox News' Tucker Carlson Tonight, host Tucker Carlson railed against the idea of defunding the police before claiming that the increase in homicides was caused by police reform efforts. Carlson went on to say that the problem was the police. There weren't any, and those who remained weren't allowed to enforce the law. So this is just talking about everything that they had said. Different people. Faulkner Focus, Jason Rantz denied the pandemic may have played a role in homicide increase, beyond some politicians taking advantage of it to forward even more of the left-wing policies on policing. No, I think it definitely played a part. Absolutely. I think it played a part. I don't know how big of a part, but I feel like that was part of the reason, being shut up in a home and, people that are unhinged being locked in a home and can't do anything because they feel like they have to mind and do what their government says. Maybe they just snap. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that's like. September 27th, the Federalist said the murder increase occurred amid a left-wing campaign to defund the police and claimed a national crime surge occurred after Democrat-led city councils voted to divert funds away from policing. September 28th, the Washington Examiner mentioned the country's increase in homicides as evidence that BLM activists do not really believe that Black Lives Matter, no matter what they say, claiming that forcing police into retreat only encourages murders. The op-ed drew the conclusion that the new crime data shows it is time to cast aside anti-police ideologies. I agree with that statement. BLM activists do not really believe that Black Lives Matter. They don't. If they believed that, they would be fighting for all Black lives lost to homicide, violence. They would do it for everybody, especially the children that are being shot and killed in the crosshairs of the gang violence in Chicago, or the ones that have died in California. There was a video of a parent absolutely losing it because their child had just been shot because they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But you don't see BLM going and advocating for these children. But what you do see is you see them funneling money to purchase mansions. And I think that was the newest story. In Canada, they purchased a mansion in Canada. I don't know. But they don't really care. They are trying to push radical left ideologies and policies into our government and get things passed that should never be passed, and also make a lot of money doing it. The Daily Caller attempted to tie the murder increase to police reforms by mentioning the FBI crime report, adding, a number of large cities reduced police budgets or restricted policing tactics, in some cases corresponding with an increase in crime levels. You know, it's funny that they act like Media Matters is acting like that is not the case. However, Minneapolis cut down their police force, and then eventually had to start hiring people again because they didn't have enough police and there was crime happening and they couldn't handle it because there was not enough police to take care of it. So you're telling me that's not a cause and effect? Sure it is. And then Turning Point USA's Human Events Daily host and senior editor Jack Posobiec implored his viewers to get out of cities because they are not the place to be for the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to be in a downward spiral. He said that when you have the attacks on police officers that we've seen since 2020 on, when you have these massive campaigns against the enforcement of the rule of law that enables criminals, which Posobiec implied was the cause of the increase in homicides, when you combine those two, the riots and the anti-police policies, you get 30% rise in murder. So a 2020 Washington Post review of spending on state and local police over the past 60 years found no correlation nationally between spending and crime rates. Similarly, according to a 2019 USA Today, the Memphis Commercial Appeal and Marshall Project investigation, the number of police officers declined in the country from 97 to 2016, and so did the violent crime rate. A former New York City Police Department official told USA Today that when the city decided to reduce the number of officers on the street, the crime rate decreased. He concluded it's not the number of officers you have, but rather what you have them doing. Okay. Right. Okay. So they're saying because this happened once where we had less police officers on the street and there wasn't a lot of crime, that means that's exactly what's happening here. Less police officers on the street is not causing the rise in homicides. Except it's not just less police. It's the rhetoric of the police are bad. They hate black people. They're hunting and killing black people. And if you are, if someone tries to, well, here, go shoplift and loot stores up to $1,000 and we're not going to prosecute. We're going to change armed robbery from a felony to a misdemeanor so that that is why the crime is rising. They know if they have the right political ideology, they will not have to face any of the consequences. Most definitely depending on where they live and where these crimes are committed. They know that. They have been told, do what you want because we're not going to do anything to you. Because it's just social justice. You're just trying to, you've been brought to this because of all your oppression, all your life. Except I'm not exactly sure how that correlates with Asian people getting the crap beat out of them by black people or being pushed onto the railroad tracks and being run over by a subway because, that is a huge thing too. Not only have black people been committing hate crimes against Asians, but even against Jews. But it's just because they've been oppressed. Well, last I checked, Asians didn't oppress black people. So why do they have such hate for them? What is it? What is it that causes them to behave in such a way other than they are getting a free pass to act out on their darkest desires, which would be violent crimes, apparently, because that's what's rising. So no, it may not just be the defund the police policies. There obviously is a lot of facets to why it's happening. But defund the police is part of it, so that's not wrong. And I don't think that Turning Point USA and Fox and all that, I don't think that they were saying that it's just this. This is the only thing that's caused it. I think they're saying that this is a catalyst for it. And this is why it's happening now. we've had all this other stuff. You add this to it, and it really takes it to a new level. That's what I think they were saying. Okay. I found this other one from Media Matters about Facebook. Facebook's top political post. I thought it'd be interesting to look at. It's a daily record of posts with the most interactions from top Facebook news and political pages. It's written by the whole Media Matters staff. So it says here, every day Media Matters uses Facebook's CrowdTangle tool to identify and share the 10 posts with the most interactions from top political and news-related Facebook pages. Our list also specifies the ideological leaning of each page. To capture the daily news cycle, each day's list covers posts made between 8 a.m. Eastern Time the previous day and 8 a.m. Eastern Time the day of posting. So data for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday is aggregated and presented on Mondays. Okay. Publicly available data and reporting on Facebook engagement primarily focus on shared links. New York Times technology columnist Kevin Roose and Professor Fabio Giglietto highlight the top performing link post on Twitter every day. In addition to links, our analysis includes all text, photos, native videos, live videos, and YouTube videos shared by the most popular political and news-related pages. For a full explanation of how we developed ideological assignments for these pages, you can look at their methodology. So Media Matters and others have demonstrated again and again that there is no bias or censorship against conservatives on Facebook, despite the claims to the contrary. This data set is more evidence that no such bias exists. Well, it does. The problem is it's harder to censor really popular outlets who may have money to sue you for, doing something you're technically not allowed to do. But the smaller people, they get censored. I have been locked out of Facebook several times. For an entire month, I couldn't make live videos or post. I was just fact-checked in December. I was fact-checked for a post that went up. It was a picture of a wolf pack. And the text was talking about these wolves at the front and these in the middle and this one at the back. Their position in the pack. The leader being the one in the back so he can make sure everybody is in the right spot. The sick and the old in the middle. The small, whatever. And then the strongest on either end to protect the more vulnerable wolf pack. Now, whether or not that's how a wolf pack actually works, it doesn't matter. That wasn't the point. The point was that leaders, they don't lead to get attention. You don't have to be the center of attention to be a leader. What you need to do to be a leader is be able to take care of everybody involved, right? Something to that effect. And that was fact-checked, saying that that's not how a wolf pack actually works. Like, who cares? There was a moral to the story. It was more like a parable, is what it was, to kind of explain what a leader really should be like in a person. And I was fact-checked. It's ridiculous. Anyway, so the daily top 10 Facebook posts about news and politics. So number 1, you have Ben Shapiro. This is February 1st, 2022. It was a link, and it had over 188,000 interactions. The number 2 was Franklin Graham, who is also right-leaning, apparently. It was a link that had over 155,000 interactions. The other 98%, which is left-leaning, had a photo. So really, the point is, Ben Shapiro was on a lot of it. You have DeSantis, you have Breitbart, and you have Fox News. But you only have 2 posts that are left-leaning that they have followed. And that is their proof that the right isn't censored on Facebook. Not really sure how that works. So it says, percentage of posts and interactions from the day or specified time frame that were categorized as right-leaning, left-leaning, or non-aligned. So you had left-leaning pages, you had 12.5% posts, and 21% interactions. Right-leaning pages, you had 26.8% post and 47.3% interactions. And then if you look at non-aligned pages, There's over 60% post and 31.5% interactions. Now, 2021 interaction trends. So since January 1st, 2022, this chart below details trends in interactions for the different ideological page groupings since the beginning of 2022. So, obviously, if you're on audio only, you cannot see what I'm looking at. But the right-leaning page interactions is a much bigger, it has much bigger spikes than either left or non-aligned pages. I would say the reason why that is happening here lately is more people are waking up to what is going on and they are sick of it. And so now they are searching out alternative media, which alternative media typically is right-leaning because you can't get right-leaning on TV anymore. It's all left-leaning. And so they look for it on Facebook and YouTube. And I think more people are doing that because they want to know what can we do? How many people feel the same as me? I feel like I'm the only one that feels this way. I need to go find other people that feel the same way so I know I'm not alone. I think that's why you're seeing that trend now. Now, in the last 30 days, you can still see that right-leaning page interactions is much bigger for just the same exact reasons as I just said. So, Ben Shapiro, that top one that had over 188,000 interactions, was a picture of an article from the Daily Wire. Ben Shapiro said the dominoes are starting to fall. Says India Ari pulling her music from Spotify over Joe Rogan's comments on race. Then you have Franklin Graham made a post. It says, this Prince George's County resident is turning 100 years old. Her secret to longevity will surprise you. And that's all it is. And her secret was, the secret is the grace of God living in me and me trying to live the best life that I could. The secret is loving the Lord. Okay? I'm not surprised that nobody would try to censor that because it's not political. So, the other 98%, which this was a left-leaning group, it was a tweet from Baby the Divine. Why does America put income caps on disabled people but not billionaires? Then you have Breitbart. Exclusive. Senator Marsha Blackburn calls for a special counsel to investigate Biden family China business dealings, which I heard that J.P. Morgan is being subpoenaed for those financial records. I don't know how true that is. And then you have a lot of them from Ben and Breitbart about the whole Whoopi thing, and DeSantis about the truck convoy in Canada. And then the other left-leaning one you have, which is Occupy Democrats. It's just Fox News in a drawing, and it says lights, camera, bullcrap. And that's all that is. And then more stuff about Whoopi Goldberg. So I know that they're trying to use all of this to say that conservatives are not censored on Facebook, or rather any social media platform, to be honest, is what they think. That's not true. Bigger people like Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Breitbart, of course they're not being censored. Now, they do get on YouTube. Sometimes they have to take certain things off, or they have videos taken down. But on Facebook, they don't typically mess with people who have lots of money. It's just the little people, the regular people, are the ones being censored. That way you can't communicate with other people that think like you, or where you can. This is why I said you need to start meeting in person. You're never going to make the changes that you need concerning our government and the policies unless you start meeting in person, because the social media thing's just not going to work. Now, God, this is going much, much longer than I intended it to be. I saw this on Salon, and I'm not sure where, I don't know what this is from. All I know is it says, Mitch McConnell's moment of truth. For many whites, black people aren't real Americans. McConnell's gaffe was nothing of the kind. It reflected a core belief driving the Republican attack on democracy. Well, what I can say is I do not share the same sentiment as Mitch McConnell, if that is in fact what he said. I don't think most white Americans feel that way. I don't think that. I think that's just, this is Salon, so take it with a grain of salt. This was written by Chauncey DeVega. So, years ago, a prominent black psychologist told me that racists almost always tell on themselves. That advice has proven very useful in my life. That tendency, if not compulsion, to reveal their racist beliefs and values is especially powerful for the affluent, the influential, and others with the public voice. You just have to know to listen. Sometimes the reveal is obvious, and at other times it is subtle, but they almost always tell on themselves. Why? This is likely a function of hubris and arrogance, along with a deeply held belief that people like them will not be held responsible for their behavior. They also believe that most other white people agree with them, albeit if in secret, but are constrained by politeness or political correctness. In essence, they think white racists are America's real silent majority, and moreover that white people are the most authentic and real Americans. Black people and other non-whites are something else, something second class or less than. They are diminished Americans at best, in various ways, inauthentic or suspect. I don't think that's true. I don't think that most white people think that. Absolutely not. I'm sure there are people that think it, but I'm sure there's people that, black people that think that white people aren't real Americans. Heck, there's Nick Cannon thinks that, we're animals and technically we don't really exist. White people aren't real. So, you got it on both sides. Such a belief about the inferiority of non-whites, at least until proven otherwise to the satisfaction of the white gaze, is a type of background noise constantly present between the beats of so much of American life and history. Last week, in response to a reporter's question about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said, "If you look at the statistics, African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans." Okay. Let me take that phrase, because I can almost guarantee you that this is what Mitch McConnell meant. Because if you're normal, okay, if you're an American citizen, if you are born here in America, you are American. I know we use it, and I know it's been used, and, it's hard to get out of the habit of doing it. And I also have that same issue of making it a habit. I don't think that we should be calling black people African Americans, because they are not. They're Americans. Asian people, they're not Asian American. They are Americans. Indian American. No, they are just Americans. And I think we need to get in the habit of just referring to each other as Americans if you are American. And I think that was, now I could be wrong because I can't prove what's going on in his mind, but I feel like I can say with a good percentage of certainty that when he said African American, he literally meant people that have recently migrated from Africa to here and became citizens. Like people from Nigeria. We do have a lot of Nigerians that immigrate here to America, and then they become citizens. And I think that's what he meant by that statement. I think he was including Americans as all races, but he was saying that the Africans that have immigrated here recently, in maybe the last few decades, I'm not sure what his time frame was, but I think that's what he was talking about. The Africans that have immigrated here, and they are turning out in big numbers voting more than just people who are American, where they're born here and they lived here and they're generations here. I think that's what he meant by that. But of course, left-leaning media is going to take that and twist it and make him sound like a racist, and I don't believe that's true. So later that day, on January 20th, the one-year anniversary of Joe Biden's inauguration, Senate Republicans refused even to allow a vote on the bill named for the legendary civil rights leader, which would help ensure that the voting rights of all Americans are protected. The meaning of those words was clear enough, no matter how McConnell sought to spin them afterward. The Republican leader in the U.S. Senate was saying that black people are not exactly Americans, as compared quite obviously to white people. And I do not think, I'm telling you, that's not what he meant. Contrary to what some would prefer to claim, this was not a gaffe or clumsy misstatement. McConnell spoke his personal truth. As powerful white men so often do, he told on himself. Indeed, why should this surprise anyone? McConnell has shown through his behavior and words, and more importantly through the public policies and laws he has supported and advanced, that these are deeply held and sincere beliefs. McConnell supports a new Jim Crow apartheid system where black and brown people's votes, and by implication their other civil rights and human rights, are to be restricted and suppressed through voter exclusion, gerrymandering, changes to election rules, and other means both legal and otherwise, including violence, intimidation, and if need be, a coup against democracy, such as the one we experienced last January. Except it wasn't a coup. No one had weapons. No one that entered the Capitol that day seriously had the ability to overthrow the government. Mitch McConnell remains a leading figure in the Republican Party, in legislative terms perhaps its most powerful figure, which can now be considered the world's largest white supremacist organization. The fact that McConnell personally dislikes Donald Trump is, in this context, largely irrelevant. He supported Trump's fascist agenda without complaint for 4 years, advancing it through Congress as far as possible. You know, it's so funny to hear the fascists call the non-fascists fascists. Because they are the fascists. And I don't know if they're just not self-aware that they are, or if they know exactly what they're doing. Though this should be obvious, but still needs to be said. McConnell's implicit belief that black Americans are not full-fledged Americans is absurd on many levels. It is based on the premise that black people remain guest or provisional residents in a country they literally built through centuries of violence, enslavement, murder, rape, and other forms of exploitation. In so many ways, America would not exist as it is today without the labor, suffering, survival, intelligence, creativity, and strength of black people. I'm not even going to touch that. I have huge disagreements with what she just said because she's basing all of that information from the 1619 Project, which is a huge lie. None of that's real in the 1619 Project, and that's where she's getting that information from. I'm not even going to touch on that. Ralph Ellison addressed this in his famous essay, What America Would Be Like Without the Blacks. The fantasy of an America free of blacks is at least as old as the dream of creating a truly democratic society. While we are aware that there is something inescapably tragic about the cost of achieving our democratic ideals, we keep such tragic awareness segregated in the rear of our minds. We allow it to come to the fore only during moments of great national crisis. On the other hand, there is something so embarrassingly absurd about the notion of purging the nation of blacks that it seems hardly a product of thought at all. It is more like a primitive reflex, a throwback to the dim past of tribal experience, which we rationalize and try to make respectable by dressing it up in the gaudy and highly questionable trappings of what we call the concept of race. Yet despite its absurdity, the fantasy of a blackless America continues to turn up. It is a fantasy born not merely of racism, but of petulance, exasperation, and moral fatigue. It is like a boil bursting forth from impurities in the bloodstream of democracy. Do you know who wanted to rid America of black people after slavery ended? Abraham Lincoln. Like, he thought it'd be better just to send everybody back to Africa. But they were allowed to choose. They could if they wanted to, but they were allowed to choose to stay here. And they were given, and it doesn't matter the hardships that they faced, because all that was overcome, and they were rewarded, and they made some huge differences for the black people that were here after slavery ended. And they should be recognized and acknowledged. But had they not allowed ex-slaves to choose to stay and try to build a life in America and said, well, no, you're no longer slaves. We're just going to ship you back to Africa because we don't own you anymore. But you're not going to stay here. Go back to Africa. If they had actually done that, they would have been sold back into slavery somewhere else. But they were given the opportunity to stay here. And it's what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word? Despite the hardships, black people have come a long way from the times of slavery. They really have. But nobody acts like it. Everybody acts like it's still horrible for black people, and it's not. It's just not. Anyway, materially, psychologically and culturally, part of the nation's heritage is Negro American, and whatever it becomes will be shaped in part by the Negro's presence, which is fortunate, for today it is the Black American who puts pressure upon the nation to live up to its ideals. It is he who gives creative tension to our struggle for justice and for the elimination of those factors, social and psychological, which make for slums and shaky suburban communities. It is he who insists that we purify the American language by demanding that there be a closer correlation between the meaning of words and reality, between ideal and conduct, between our assertions and our actions. Without the Black American, something irrepressibly hopeful and creative would go out of the American spirit, and the nation might well succumb to the moral slobism that has always threatened its existence from within. Obviously, America would be a different place without all the people that were involved, and that means everybody up to today. Of course, it would be a different place. But to act like it couldn't be a great place, that the only reason America is great is because of Black people, well, that's racist. That's racist against all the other races, saying, you couldn't do it without us. Just like when the white rich liberals get up and say, shh, hey, you, Black person, I'm going to speak for you because I know what's best for you. You sit down and be quiet. I'm going to handle this. I'm going to allow you to go get into college without having to score really high on your test because you're ignorant and you can't get the same scores as an Asian or a white person. So we're going to make it so much easier for you. And without us, you couldn't do it. That's white knighting. That's what these white liberals do. Deep down, they are secretly racist, or they actually are explicitly racist, but most of them are implicitly racist, and they don't realize that the things they say and do shows how racist and how degrading and how demeaning they are to the Black community as a whole. That really is true. You can just listen to the way they talk. So, in many ways, the Black freedom struggle was and is an attempt to save America from its own worst impulses, right? See? So, because white people are just racist, white supremacists, and we have all these dark desires that without the Black community, we would be acting these out all the time. That is not true. That's not true. Not just from racism and white supremacy, but also from greed and selfishness and widespread inequality and other anti-democratic and anti-human forces. Consider one of recent history's great what-ifs. Would America now face its current crisis of democracy and so many other disasters, both day-to-day and existential, if Black Americans' warnings about Trump, the Republican Party, and the larger white right had been heeded in 2016? How much misery, death, destruction, sorrow, pain, and loss, both already here and soon to come, could have been avoided? Except in 2020, Trump received a higher African American vote, Black American vote, than he did in 2016. Meaning more Black people wanted Trump back in office than didn't. But they try to lie to you and act like the Black people didn't like Trump and they didn't want him there. And that is not true either. Our Mitch McConnell has no such awareness, but with his clear pronouncement that African American voters are in some unspecific way not Americans, he was summoning up from the worst parts of the country's history like a dark priest calling upon a Lovecraftian horror, a question that has remained unanswered for centuries. Are Black Americans full and equal citizens and members of this nation and this society on the same level as white Americans? Should all Americans, irrespective of race or color, be equal in their constitutionally guaranteed rights and liberties? Does we the people include white people and non-white people on an equal footing? Yes. It includes all American citizens. Whether you were born as an American or immigrated and you became an American citizen. But that's the only way it extends. You have to be an American citizen, whether natural or you immigrated here. So yes, it does. It does. These questions and how they should be answered are the driving force behind the rise of Trumpism and American neo-fascism and the subsequent assault on America's multiracial democracy. McConnell's straightforward statement that Black people are somehow distinct from Americans does not reflect an isolated or anachronistic belief, but rather one widely held across white America. Public opinion and other research has repeatedly demonstrated that being American is conflated with being white. Social scientists and other experts have also shown that white Americans believe themselves to be more patriotic and more loyal and to possess more quintessential American values, such as hard work, personal responsibility, individualism, and discipline than black Americans. Other research shows that the political and other decision making of many white Americans, especially conservative authoritarians and Trumpists, is highly motivated by social dominance behavior and a desire to protect and expand the power of white people in American society. A significant percentage of white Americans, especially those who identify with the Republican Party or who support Trump, are willing to abandon democracy if it means sharing equal power with black and brown Americans. I don't believe that. New research also shows that tens of millions of white Americans are willing to condone or endorse violence to remove Joe Biden and the Democrats from power in defense of the American way of life and traditional values, thinly veiled code phrases for white power and white privilege. Those are the same people who are likely to support last January's attempted coup and the assault on the U.S. Capitol. Okay, let me break this down for you. It wasn't a coup. Did people do things that they shouldn't have at the Capitol on January 6th? Yes. Should they be held accountable? Yes. And vice versa for BLM and Antifa, but we know that's not going to happen. But to say that we condone or endorse violence to remove Biden, it's not violent. Our Declaration of Independence, our founding documents tell us that when a government becomes tyrannical and it is changing into something that it was never intended to be, we, the people, have the right to go in and dismantle that government and build it back from the ground up. That doesn't mean go in there, guns blazing and killing everybody. It just means we have the authority to take over and start something new because this isn't working anymore. We have that right as citizens of this country. And you can see, especially with the Freedom Convoy, with the trucks in Canada, and the people, the UK backing out on their restrictions, and I think it was New Zealand is backing down. You can see people backing down from this tyrannical thing that they had been doing across the entire globe because they are scared of the people. Because people have just had enough. And if they don't start backing off, they are going to see a revolt, a revolution. What's happening in Canada is the biggest thing that's ever happened in Canada as far as the citizens fighting back against a tyrannical government. And I think it would be great to see them free themselves and become a sovereign nation, no longer dependent on being under the Queen and all of Parliament in the UK. I think it would be great to see Canada become its own nation. It's about time. The UK owns, that monarchy covered, Canada, you have the UK, you have Scotland, isn't Scotland's part of the UK and England and all that, right? The Bahamas, I believe. They have so much. Australia, New Zealand, the Queen's on their money. They own so much land, and it's about time that some of these people decide we're just going to be a sovereign nation. We're no longer going to answer to these people. This is a lot, man. I would never have started reading this so late if I had known it was going to be so much to read. Okay, in response to McConnell's remarks, many black Americans took to social media and elsewhere to assert their dignity, humanity, and full American belonging. Many black women and black men donned their military uniforms as they channeled the power of the Double V campaign during World War II, and black Americans' centuries of military service and patriotism as a way of battling against white supremacy in its many forms. That black Americans feel the need to do this all over again in the 21st century is an indictment of America's lack of progress along the color line. In January of 1942, a man named James G. Thompson wrote a letter to the Pittsburgh Courier, a prominent African-American newspaper. In that letter, he tried to work through the complex and conflicted feelings many black Americans had about World War II, America, and the conundrum of military service. Being an American of dark complexion and some 26 years, these questions splashed through my mind. Should I sacrifice my life to live half American? Will things be better for the next generation and the peace to follow? Would it be demanding too much to demand full citizenship rights in exchange for the sacrificing of my life? Is this kind of America I know worth defending? Will America be a true and pure democracy after the war? Will colored Americans suffer still the indignities that have been heaped upon them in the past? These and other questions need answering. I want to know, and I believe every colored American who is thinking wants to know. The V for Victory sign is being displayed prominently in all so-called democratic countries which are fighting for victory over aggression, slavery, and tyranny. If this V sign means that to those now engaged in this great conflict, then let we colored Americans adopt a double V, V for a double victory. The first V for victory over our enemies from without, the second V for victory over our enemies from within. For surely those who perpetrate these ugly prejudices here are seeking to destroy our democratic form of government just as surely as the Axis forces. And still, once again, nobody understands that we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. It's completely different. Get it right. Thompson's letter still resonates. It offers more evidence of how America's history, for good and for ill, echoes through to the present. This is especially true in the age of Trump, a moment when America's neo-fascist tide is rising, and so many in white America still doubt that black and brown people should have the same equal and full rights as white people. Nobody thinks that. Truly, no one thinks that. You may have your little fringe of what? I think it's like 300 white supremacists countrywide. That's how many there are, last I heard. Nobody really thinks that. Mitch McConnell's beliefs about who is a real American and who is not took vivid and monstrous human form last January 6th. Trump has waved the Confederate flag, one of America's and the world's most potent symbols of white supremacy, as they attacked the Capitol. That's not true. The Confederate flag does not promote white supremacy. In fact, I did an episode about the Civil War and the Confederate flag. It was it was closer to the beginning of when I started the podcast, so you have to scroll down quite a bit. If you want to go check it out, that's not what it means. They assembled a working gallows. In America, such imagery cannot be separated from the lynching of thousands of black men, women, and children during the Jim and Jane Crow terror regime. Was it ever called Jane Crow or just Jim Crow? Did they just add that to be for equality purposes to include women? Trump has carried a huge Christian cross through the crowd, a symbol of the way white supremacy and white Christianity are inseparable bedfellows in America's history. White Christian. See, this is not just an attack on white people now. This is an attack on Christianity, on our religion. And it's not a white religion. It's for everybody. Trump's attack force was willing to kill and die for that cause of ending racial democracy and their collective belief, stated or otherwise, that white people like them have a special claim on the status of American. Black and brown Capitol police officers and their white comrades fought back against these thousands of rage-filled Trump attackers to defend the Capitol and the people in it. But did they really fight back? Because I didn't see it. And multiracial democracy itself. Many of those law enforcement officers were assaulted with racial slurs and other white supremacist invective. After Trump's attack force had finally been driven from the Capitol, it was black and brown janitors and other maintenance people who put things back together again, cleaning up feces, urine, litter, and other evidence of vandalism and hooliganism. Really? Because I've never seen any evidence of any of that happening. Yes, some broken windows. Nancy Pelosi's lectern was stolen. This is the first time I'm ever hearing that feces and urine needed to be cleaned up from the Capitol. Never heard that before. They would just release all the thousands of other hours of video footage. Maybe we might know what really happened that day. Beyond his beliefs about who the real Americans are, Mitch McConnell's comment was incorrect in another sense as well, as the Washington Post explained. McConnell not only overstated the situation a bit, but comparing the turnout of black voters to the entire voting population is misleading because these numbers are apples and oranges. The entire population, in which the turnout rate is dragged down by other ethnic groups versus just one ethnic group. The more appropriate comparison is between ethnic groups such as white Americans and black Americans. That comparison shows there has been a persistent gap and it increased in 2020. But even to vote in the numbers they did, black Americans had to overcome numerous roadblocks and obstacles put in place by the Republican Party and its agents. Oh, you mean having a photo ID? Really? That was really hard? In response, McConnell and his allies and supporters have made clear that they believe black Americans and other non-whites must work much harder still, even to have the hypothetical chance of exercising their constitutionally guaranteed rights and liberties on an equal basis with the white Americans. Yeah, they have to go get a driver's license or an ID just like everybody else and show proof of who they are and their citizenship just like everybody else. They are capable of doing it. And these people acting like they are so ignorant that they can't even obtain an ID, while simultaneously saying that in order to go into restaurants in New York, you must have your vaccine card and your ID to get into the restaurant. So it's very difficult to get an ID to go vote, but you will be banned from restaurants unless you have an ID. So why people still believe that having an ID is racist, well, then let the mayor of New York know, hey, this is racist because I can't get into a restaurant because I don't know how to get an ID. But see, that's not the case. And they know that's not the case, which is why they do it when it comes to vaccine passports. They just don't want it with voting because they want illegals to be able to vote. That is the whole purpose of this. In America, white privilege and white power remain normalized and idolized, and rich white men, especially if Christian and conservative, are understood to be the natural and rightful rulers. White America will not surrender such a vision and such entrenched power without a struggle. The psychological and material wages of that idea of whiteness are too great. Far too many are willing to kill and die for it. Oh, finally, it's over. So I'm going to end the episode here. I just had to stop recording so I could start a new recording because I was running out of time and it would have just ended on me. I didn't intend for it to go that long on that last article, but I thought it was very interesting. So obviously I wanted to keep reading it. I didn't want to just skim through it. I had some other stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I guess I can save that for another episode. I don't know if I'll be able to do an extra one this week or not, or just save it for Monday. But I hope you enjoyed hanging out with me. And next time, on the next episode, we're going to talk about the differences between Hitler and Mao. And this is stuff that I got from Louder with Crowder. So we're going to go over that because I thought that would be very interesting to look at, especially in light of what will be said about the Holocaust not being about race. Anyway, go to Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcast, Apple. Subscribe to the podcast. You can leave me a review. Also, you can head on over to YouTube. You can watch all my videos there. You can like and share the videos. Leave me a comment. I'll get back to you. But the best thing that you can do for me is to subscribe to the channel and then hit the notification bell so you know when I upload new videos. And again, I appreciate all the support. I've noticed, at least on my the audio podcast, that I was getting a lot more listens and downloads of the podcast. So I do appreciate that. It really means a lot to me. And I look forward to seeing you again and hanging out some more. So be careful if you are here in Texas dealing with the ice. And have a good rest of your day. And God bless.